Alright, we're back with another game with Eidolon Burn. Once again, paying close mind in this matches of whether Eidolon is a good card in the matchup and whether it's a card that should be maybe revisited as to becoming the standard in Burn decks again. This time we were on the draw. The one downside to this hand, one of the reasons I moved away from the 5th Canopy Land, Fiery Islet, and to Sekenzan was hands like this, where you draw a couple Canopy Lands and you're going to do a ton of damage to yourself. The other downside to this one is Eidolon's also going to deal us potentially a ton of damage. So, that said, outside of the damage aspect, I think this hand has Goblin Guide and Eidolon with some burn spells. Is a pretty good hand against most Gigantha decks. Really, there's several decks that can play Gigantha anymore, so you can't really tell too much by the companion, but it is a good thing to note. But we definitely have a keep here. It goes turn 1. Well, they're in Epicure Pass. We play it Goblin Guide and attack in. Opponent plays a variant of the Convoke aggro deck that is all the rage in the modern format, or in the Pioneer format right now. Opponent attacks in, thinks about attacking, they decide to do a dance, do a little dance, end up attacking with nothing, play Clarion Spirit and pass. These are the kind of matchups that Eidolon always historically was very good in. Even against decks like Affinity, if you get it down on turn 1 or 2. Oftentimes you could get in these situations where just deal your opponent a ton of damage. Go ahead and block here, trade off the Eidolon. It's really done its job. They have Volvadare and Epicure, and then they go ahead and discard something. End of turn here, we're going to unload some of our hand. Skull Crack them, and untap. Go ahead and draw Lightning Helix. Let's see if we can get our opponent to bite here. And we don't. And we don't have the ability to cast as enough spells. So, and the opponent just gets us dead here. So, those of you that don't know what this deck does is it plays a bunch of these early one-drop creatures like this, Thraben Inspector, potentially Ornithopter. They also play cards like Clarion Spirit, and then they play Knight Errant and Luxodon. What's the name of the card? The Convoke Venerated Luxodon allows you to convoke. One allows you to look at the top 6 cards and take 2 creature cards equal to the number of creatures you convoke. The other one, just for each creature that's convoked, whenever it enters the battlefield, the creatures get +1/+1. So, interesting deck. It's very much like the old school affinity lists in some regards of just dump a bunch of things on the battlefield and try to overwhelm your opponent with overwhelming power. So this is one of those weird matchups where Eidolon is okay, so we really shaved down 1. The rest of the sideboard looks like we boarded out a couple of Skull Cracks. So, interesting to see how this matchup plays out. We're on the play for this game, and notably the things that I talked about, the damage from the lands that we took and Eidolon, really came back to get us. We boarded in the Smash to Smithereens. Now this hand, it's a 4-lander, so I think this hand's a mulligan despite the good start, and then this hand is very good for a 6-card hand. Put back one of the lands, and go ahead and play Goblin Guide into Eidolon. I'd be more inclined to board some number of Eidolons out in the draw. They have Forge Tender, which is annoying, but they play Clarion Spirit, deal themselves a bunch of damage. Mem Knight, deal themselves a bunch of damage. We go ahead and smash the Smithereens. They take a bunch of damage. We pass. Once again, nice thing about Eidolon, don't always have to be attacking with it to deal a ton of damage. Feels like our opponent's going to convoke something here. They have Knight Errant. We go ahead and bolt them down to 3. They reveal Clarion Spirit Memnite, and we untap and just kill them. So I guess we played. Not sure why I played it in that order. Shouldn't even know. Oh, because of Burrington Forge Tender. That's right on the battlefield, and I'm not even paying attention. Okay, opponent attacks in. Go ahead and double block the Knight Errant. Once again, leaving the Eidolon in play. Opponent goes to 1. We just pass. This will force them to use the Burrington Forge Tender. We both go to 1, and they can't cast any more spells unless they could convoke something, so we win because they got a little overly aggressive with attacking there. Look at the sideboarding. I brought the Skull Cracks back in and went down the Eidolons on the draw. Well, Skull Crack is not necessarily a huge deal in the matchup because our opponent doesn't seem to have any life gain in their deck, or if they do, it's something, who knows what, but it is relevant against Burrington Forge Tender and the fact that Eidolon is a lot worse on the draw against these decks that dump out their entire hand on turn 2, turn 3. One lander, I think this is a hand you could gamble and keep, so guessing this is a hand that I kept. Yeah, kept. Yep, opponent has a huge early draw. We just go ahead and pass. They have a Forge Tender. We block, which I'm not even sure why they attack there, if I'm being completely honest. Now we go ahead and suspend Rift Bolt. Pass turn, no reason to attack because of the Forge Tender. Opponent with an Epicure. It looks like they're stuck on 1 land. And they're going to convoke a big dumb elephant. Yep. And then we're going to potentially get to attack in through the elephants. Depending on what they want to do with their Forge Tender. Obviously, the opponent on turn 2, turn 3 has a lot of power in play, but we have a lot of 1 casting cost burn spells, so screw the critics. Lava Spike. And attack. No reason not to. One either has to block with the Luxodon or sacrifice their Forge Tender. They attack with almost everything. Almost putting us on a turn 2 turn clock. It's all with 1 land, mind you. And we just bolt them. Hopefully we draw another burn spell or something here. Okay, we cast Lava Spike. Go ahead and swing in, see if we can get them to not block, but they did, so. Opponent doesn't currently have lethal. They would have needed something drastic like land plus, I guess land plus Bushwhacker would have done it. So very, very close matchup. Eidolon, pretty solid on the play, pretty bad on the draw, so kind of a balanced matchup where you want it on the play and not on the draw. Somewhat like the old Affinity matchups, somewhat like the old Storm matchups where it's an exceptional card on the play and on the draw it's very middling to bad. Alright, we're up against Menino Nay. I believe they're typically on Living In variants, so we're on the play. 1 lander, a little bit of a risk, so I think we have to mulligan this one. This hand's okay on the draw. Bolt into Eidolon, so back one of the Sunbay Canyons. Go ahead and pass. Opponent plays Misty Rainforest. They grief us, so we go ahead and bolt them. So most likely Living End at this point. And then we just simply have Searing Blaze. It's kind of weird that they leave us with Eidolon. I think Eidolon represents more damage than Boros Charm did there, and I don't think it matters because Eidolon's not going to deal enough damage. Go ahead and bolt our opponent. They cast Petty Theft to bounce our Eidolon. Go to 7. We recast Eidolon. A Violent Outburst. Go to 5. Go to 3. Steal. They get to stack our deck and steal our relevant burn spell. So, kind of have their work cut out for them. Although, unfortunately, we have a creature on top. So, because the land was good for us there and the spell was good. Now we need an untapped land, and between the power of this and Architects of Will stacking the top of both players' decks, would kind of need a good balance of cards on the top 3 of our deck, and alas, we don't have that. Alright, taking a look at our sideboarding, we're bringing in our Roiling Vortexes and our copies of Wear Tear, warding out Searing Blaze and Rift Bolts. Problem with this matchup is it's already closed pre-board, and then post-board they bring in Leyline of Sanctity. His hand is closed, but the one lander, I think it's got to go back. Immediately mulligan into a no-lander. His hand's reasonable, so we'll keep. We'll keep the 2 creatures plus the Wear Tear, kind of the best we can do in the current situation. Outside of like a Roiling Vortex potentially. We go into attack here. They get 2 lands off of us, which is unfortunate. We just go ahead and cast Eidolon. They cycle Architects of Will. Could potentially have subtlety'd it, but cast a second Eidolon. We know we're getting comboed next turn, so opponent decides to go to 3, Gruesome Lair Lightning Helix, gets to stack the top of our deck. Not the biggest of things, but now we're under 6 points of pressure a turn, plus the risk of something like Force of Negation being held up, which is what they cast here. And if they have a Violent Outburst, we're just dead here. They don't, but we draw a Whirling Vortex, which is not quite good enough. So, close matchup, but I do think Living End has become another one of those matchups where Burn might be just an ever so slight dog. So overall, I think we went 3-2 this league. Eidolon was solid in a lot of matchups, but not like the best card. Like, it's good, decent against Living End. It was decent against Boros Convoke, particularly on the play. There was a couple of matches in last week's thing, and I can't remember which ones they were, that were it was a solid card in. As far as the rest of the list overall, especially when I have Eidolon in my list, I'm not a huge fan of Fiery Islet. I think Sekenzin or another fetch land or something is just ever so slightly better. I understand the utility of wanting to have as many redraws when you're flooding out, but I do think Islet plus Eidolon is maybe a little bit too much damage in some matchups. So I think, you maybe want to consider Sekenzin or something in this slot. The rest of the deck, all fine. I mean, nothing too fancy with these lists. The 2-2 split on Helix and Skullcrack. No Ragavan or any additional 1-drops in this list. Eidolon's fine. Like, at least in this league, it was alright. As far as the sideboard, the Wear Tears and Smashes kind of worked overtime in this league. Not a huge fan of the 4 Deflecting Palms, but wanted to give it a go. Just to have access to this card, just test it out a little bit every now and again, see it's kind of how I feel it's kind of positioned in the format. The matchup you want this most in, obviously, is Hammer Time. Sometimes Murktide and such, but a lot of the decks you play against have, Spell Pierces and counter spells and, either Thought Seizes or Inquisitions that allow them to play around it. So it's a fine card, but kind of a known quantity. Whirling Vortex almost always pulls its weight. We didn't really miss Sanctifier and Vec this league. Really, the only two matchups that I really want that against are Breach and Rakdos Scams. So another one of those cards. One card we might potentially have missed is Exquisite Firecraft. But sometimes you just got to rotate in other cards in and test them out a little bit to see how they feel. Overall, Eidolon, I would give it a slight nod this league. I don't know that means it's the best version of Burn plays Eidolon again, but it is something to consider a card to revisit, and it never hurts to revisit the current, what's the word I want to think about? What the assumed best deck or best version of a deck is. It's always best to revisit cards sometimes and see how they feel. But if you like Burn content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for next week's video.